story. First was Ron Heidegger. He's an extension specialist here at NC State, and he works over in Plymouth at Tidewater Research Station. Like all of these guys, we're fortunate to have them close to us. They help us so much. So we're going to turn the podium over to Ron Heidegger.
Impossible, ain't it? That's exactly my thought, you know, when Rod calls and he says, well, I'm going to make this topic, how to grow 500 bushel corn. And I said, how not to grow 500, but I think that's mission impossible. So your job or your mission, should you choose to accept it here today, is to believe that I can convince you to make 500 bushel corn here. Now, I see a few empty seats. I think many of them realized the first liar didn't have a chance, so they already had to say in front of their chair. So, you know, it is difficult to believe. But, by the way, the screens are getting a little better. By 9 o'clock tonight, it's going to be perfect here. So if you'll just wait for me, I'll be talking till about then. Anyway, it is difficult to believe when you hear a yield level of that type. How in the world could they do that? I mean, just think about Randy Downey down there in Georgia. We got better land than he does by a long shot. Our environment is better. We get cooler nights than he does down there by a long shot. Heck, we're smarter than he is. So why in the world can we not make 500 bushel corn? Well, you know, one of the nice things, or one of the things I don't know how many of you remember the old TV series Mission Impossible. I'm sure many of you see the movies. I thought the TV series was better than movies anyway. At every episode of that TV show, well, you came to the end and you realized things weren't quite what you thought they were they? Some guy or some character there wasn't who you thought he was. Some situation wasn't what you thought they were. They were in an entirely different place than you thought they were. That was the beauty of Mission Impossible. Well, guys, today I'm going to challenge us. Because I think the one thing that Randy Downey has done is he's challenged some of the assumptions of what we thought was right. And in doing so has made us go back and look at some things here that we should have probably looked at before, but we took for granted. And I'm hoping maybe through my little talk here today I can point out some things that we took for granted, that as we understand them better, all of a sudden we realize how he's put together this many different practices of getting 500, and we can do it too, indeed. So I don't know that it's mission impossible, but it is something that we should take into consideration and think about here. Now, of course, like I said earlier, the screens aren't working very good for us. If you turn to page 45, or what should have been page 45 in your handout there, and we'll start with page 1 here. And you can follow right along with what I've got to say here. Now, on page 1, I got, of course, that opening screen here. To your right of that opening screen, it says producing 300 bushel per acre corn. Let me see. Oh, yeah, there it is. And I can see it on the TV's great up here, by the way, if you want to come watch it. I can see it on my TV. You can see it in your handout up here. You know, I love it when this happens. Have I ever made No, I've never made 500 bushel corn. But I love making 300 bushel corn, and I've done that 2 or 3 times here over the last 3 years here. Now, I'm a little bit afraid of being in front of Dewey Lee, and I'll tell you why, because I'm going to be all excited about this 300 bushel corn, and he's going to come up here and tell you, forget that guy. I'm going to tell you I make 500 bushel. He's stupid. So at any rate, I just want to point out that, yeah, we can make good yields of corn, better than we thought about in the past. And I think it really comes down to looking at practices, like I said before, that some things we've taken for granted. Should we always plant 1.5 inches deep? Should I always use that hybrid there when I start my planting season? Should I always be fertilizing for this level, or should I always be thinking about this plant population? I think we need to think about these things, and that's why I'm going to challenge you here today. All right, take a look at that next slide there on that page here. What makes growing 300 to 500 bushel corn mission impossible? Well, let's take a look at the three things that I'm going to focus on that I think hold us back as much as anything. Three things that I do think we have some solutions to, don't get me wrong. First of all, difficulty with uniform emergence and growth. Let me get this up on the screen for some of you who have better eyes than I do. Well, yeah, let me do that. There we go. For difficulty with uniform emergence and growth, and we're going to look at this. Because it turns out to be something that I just can't. I'll be honest with you. I grew up growing corn. We had hard, fast rules at our farm about how deep you planted. All we were caring about is if we got 95% of the plant seeds that we planted emerged. That, guys, I'm afraid to tell you here today, that's not good enough. That's not anywhere near good enough. We got to do that better. So we're going to talk about that, and I'm going to look at how we're doing here in North Carolina. Second thing I want to look at is limitations on capturing enough light. You know, we're blessed. That's why I say we've got the environment that Randy does. We're in the sunny south. We got lots of light. We got a long growing season. We got the opportunity to take advantage of the most important resource God ever created, and that is sunlight. The problem that we have is how to do that. We let too much of it get away. We don't support the plant at times when it critically needs help in capturing that light, and I'm talking about nutrients here, and we don't think about the right balance of things that's critical in that practice. And then finally, I'm going to talk about problems with lengthening the grain field period. And I think we've heard that spoken about already here today, how we'd love to see our corn green. Now, I drive around these fields. I hate to say it. What did we miss this year? What's the one thing that you notice as we drive around the fields in North Carolina, and particularly this region? What did we not quite get done? Nitrogen. We ran out of nitrogen. That's not our fault. Don't get me wrong. I'm not blaming anybody. The environment was such. We got all those 6-inch rains there. We had rain and then dried up. It got rain. That's perfect. Nitrogen denitrification weather there. We needed to think about that as that occurred so that we didn't end up in this situation. And that's part of Randy's beauty, is he thinks ahead about what that corn crop's going to look like at harvest so that he has that great corn occurring at harvest. All right, let's start by talking about emergence. How much does here's what I'm talking about when I talk about emergence. I'm talking about 1 day later emerging than the first few plants in that field. And it's really, I need to be more specific than that. It's those first few plants in that same area. 1 day difference, or 2 days for that matter, but that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about 95% total emergence. I'm talking about the timing of emergence. How much difference does that make in your yield potential in your cornfield? Well, I got a picture from last year there on your chart there, and I've tried to show it up here on these slides here. You can see some of that differential right there. I mean, by the eye. I showed these last spring, and many of you thought, he just picked the worst ears in the field, didn't he? That's what you thought. I know you did. You might as well have been. But here's what we're seeing this year. And I don't know whether you can see these boards. I hope maybe you've had a chance, because I brought the field. I can't take you to my plots over there, so I brought the plots to you. But take a look. Here I got first emerged. That's this first column of ears here. This was planted 1.5 inches deep. And here's the ones that emerged 24 to 48 hours. There's this Pioneer 1319. Actually, some of these don't look too bad, do they? But look over there at 1456. Look at some of those 24 to 48 hour ears coming up later. They don't look so hot there. Well, that should be telling you two things. First of all, you should be starting to get worried about how your corn emerges. And you are right to be worried about how your corn emerges. Turn the page there on your chart here, and I'm going to explain. So this is probably the most important chart that I've got to show you here. I think, yeah, there it is. It's coming up on the screen here. Now, because of the way that this translated into this graph, you can't see the axes. So let me explain what's on these axes. On the left-hand side, the up and down vertical axis is grain weight. On the right-hand side, the up and down vertical axis is number, either row or kernel number. And then the bars on the 3 bars on the left side are initial emergence. In other words, plants that initially emerge the first day, and the bars on the right are plants that emerge 24 to 48 hours later. So that's the sum total of that graph right there. Now, what we did to get this data, I went out, and of course and I told you this last spring, we go out and we're watching this corn, and when those first few little spikes start showing up, we're out there with flags or golf tees. I found out this year that your golf tees work really good. Just put a golf tee by those that are coming out. You can get those different color golf tees, but put orange ones by the ones that come up first. So we put golf tees or flags by those we saw that first day, and then we came back and we put some different color golf tees or different color flags by the ones we saw 24 hours later. And then we came back and we did the same thing 48 hours later. So that's how we marked it. We did this last year, we did this, we did it again this year. If you go out to my plots, I can show you the flags are still there, the golf tees are still there, and you can see by your own sight what the difference is in ears, and it won't take you very. We've had this done by agents down in Pamlico County, out in the Piedmont. We're all finding the same thing. There's a difference in ears. Now, let me explain what this shows here as far as the quantitative difference. That little bar in the middle of the 3, that's row numbers around the cob. That little line that's just above it is 14. So what that is showing is that we're about 1 to 2 rows less on average. So I took and got all the ears that emerged first. I counted the rows, and I got all those ears that emerged 24 to 40. I counted those rows. 1 to 2 rows less around the cob. So this effect on hurting our yield is occurring immediately in that emergence process. Then the next bar to the right, that bar is how many kernels there are per row on average. And if you look there, those 2 differences in bars is about 5 to 6 kernels per row. Now these are significant. They don't look so on the chart, but that's my data after 4 replications last year. That was significant difference in that. So as you might guess, I got 1 row or 2 rows less. I got 5 to 6 kernels less per ear. How much grain weight did I lose? It turns out it's somewhere around 1/6 to almost 1/8 of a pound per ear on average. Gosh, that's yield. I put the same seed, I put the same fertilizer, they're going to see the same water, they're going to get the same sunlight, and I'm going to get 6 to 8 a pound less per plant? You got to be kidding me. It can't be that bad, can it? Well, we're going to find out again this year, and I'm betting by the way these ears are looking in the field that it's going to be about that bad again this year. Now, the next chart over there on my sheet here, there's somebody's ahead of me. It shows the treatment effects. Now, just for your information, the treatment effects are no bigger than that effect of 24 hours. Even the best treatments, which happen to be the 2 on the left, the 3, 18, 18, and accomplished, are those 2 row bars on your left and your chart. Even those, the weight of the ears is only about 1/6 of a pound different than some of the worst treatments there that happen to be, pick out the Quattro or the untreated. So, in other words, the difference in the yield depression from the emergence is as great as anything that we treated them with out there. All right, now, the question you got to now ask yourself is how many plants in my field come up with that initial emergence? Do you get 90% of your seed up in that first day? How many think that's about average for North Carolina? 90%. Anybody? You guys are too smart, aren't you? How many think it's about 80%? Let's not go that far. Well, there's a few there. You're not as far off as I might be implied here. How many think it's 70? 60. Oh, it surely can't be worse than 50. Guess what? It sure as heck can be worse than 50. Go that next chart there on that thing there. This is the number of plants that emerge, the percent of the total stand. That's what's on the left-hand axis. I don't know, can you see anything there? Yeah, some of you can see that on it. That's a percent of the total stand that emerges on that very first day that we can find it. Now, look at those numbers carefully, because at Beaufort County, the best treatment with Pioneer 1390, I'm just comparing the two hybrids here, was what? About 58, 60%. The 1456 was less than 50%. And then I got a comparison with what the data was at Camden. It was almost 80% at Camden. And here at Camden, the 1456 was down in the 55, 60% range. You betcha it could be that bad. 50% of my plants are going to be 1/8 of a pound different. Why does Randy Dowdy go out and why is he anal about everything coming up in the first 3 or 4 hours? There's why he gets 500. There's the first secret to his success right there. Is he has a plan to get them all up in that first 24 hours. Now, don't get me wrong. Camden, Beaufort here, I got 95% emergence. All these seeds came up. They just didn't come up the first day. It took 2, 3, sometimes 4 days for some of those seeds to come through the ground. What I'm saying is that delay is hurting our yield. That's what I'm saying. It's not emergence that makes it. It's when it emerges that makes the difference here. So, with that, let's talk a little bit. Is there anything we can do? You know, now that we know, or should be scared. I'm scared about it. But now that we know how bad it can be, is there anything we can do? Well, we've got 4 different treatments we tried out this year to see if we can move the needle on this thing. The first treatment was supposed to be environment. Now, to some degree, in the chart that I've got up here, you can see that Camden and both of those plots were planted on the same day. They got a rain 2 days later, and it was cold and wet during that part of April, wasn't it? Yeah, so that's not a great environment. Now, we did not put in plots later, but I would guess if I had done so, that percent emergence on the first day would increase. Guys, there's no doubt about it, and we've seen this in subsequent counts that were made by agents. We can get 90% first day emergence if we plant when it's warm, when the soil moisture is just ideal and everything is perfect. We can get 90+% first day emergence. There's no doubt about it. Now, here's the problem. Am I going to wait another day hoping it's perfect? How do I know it's not going to snow in the middle of May like it did some places this year in North Carolina? It could get worse than better. I got fancy equipment there waiting for me to say go. I'm not going to sit there waiting for that perfect day, and you can't either. So that's a solution, but it's not a very practical one for us. Is there anything else we can do? Well, the second thing we tried was variety. And guys, here's one of your first steps toward solving this problem. And I'm sure it's one of the first steps Randy Dowdy or David Hula does in solving this problem. There is a tremendous difference in variety. So let's take, you can see that from these charts here. Somebody's making better noise than I am. Now you can see that in these charts here. Look at how the Pioneer 1390, even those that emerged a little later. Now I didn't come back every 3 hours. What I suspect here is that some of these years that I marked 24 to 48 actually came up within 6 on the Pioneer. In other words, I would bet to guess if I came back every 3 hours, some of these were emerging when those 1456 years still weren't showing up. So there's a variety difference, and that variety difference translates into cold emergence ratings, into early and bigger and cold emergence. Now, that's good news, isn't it? What am I going to do? Plant in the first week in April? The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that hybrid has the highest cold emergent rating I can find out there. That's how I'm going to solve this. I've got some data here. Let me, this is going to really be scary with these slides the way they are. Let me skip forward here. Go down to the third, page 3 there, where it says Camden in the top-hand corner, and it says differences in initial emergence due to hybrid and treatment. Yeah, the hybrid on the left is Pioneer 1390. You see all 3 of those bars. I have a little C. At least you can see on this page here in your book there. In other words, my treatments didn't make much difference there. My average emergence was almost 80%. Compare that to the 1456. The treatments made a big difference there. My 2C treatments had very much better emergence than the 31818, and that average was someplace around 50%. So that just goes to show you that hybrid differences can be very important. They make a huge 50 to 80%. That's a big difference, and that's a significant difference in that data. And now I'm going to drop back. How about what we've seen here at Beaufort? Well, the second thing we did besides hybrid was we did planting depth. Because I thought, you know, one way to really mess up that first emergence, just put it too deep, right? Just put it deep as heck, and those things will struggle to get up. Well, this is where you find out how stupid you really are. And this is where I found out how stupid I really was. Because guess what that chart shows up there? Those little bars here, and again, it's first day emergence on the y-axis, and it says differences in initial emergence due to hybrid depth and treatment. It's on page, is that page 2 now? Yeah, page 2 here. Those 3 little bars on the left represent the, I think that's Pioneer 1315, yeah, or 1319. Those 3 little bars on the left, that's 1.5 inches. That's my recommended depth for planting corn, by the way, just to show you how stupid I really am. The next 3 bars to that are still 1319, but they're planted 2.5 inches. 90-some% first day emergence. I thought, that's a fluke. We made a mistake. So I went and measured the ones on the bad hybrid, 1456. First 3 bars on the left, less than 10% emergence first day at 1.5 inches. Boy, aren't you glad you didn't listen to that specialist. The 3 on the right are 2.5 inches, again, 80 to 90% emergence if I use the right seed treatment there. Guess what? We're doing it all wrong. It's got to go deeper when you're planting early. Now, you might say, well, this is a fluffy organic soil. You know, fluffy organics, you don't have to worry so much about plant depth. Well, let's go to that next page. Let's go to page 3. Let me see if I can find the right chart to go up on this. No, next one. There we go. Here it is. It's the bottom left-hand corner on page 3. Differences in initial emergence due to depth of treatment. The one on the left side is 1.5 inches. The one on the right is 2.5 inches. What that shows, now that's a clay loam soil. That's that stiff stuff that when it gets wet and dries, it sort of gets a little crusty. The ones on the left, and yes, planting depth was not as different there, but I'd sure take that 2.5 inches there as well, and actually, on average, it's slightly better. Slightly better. Yeah, give me this. Slightly better than the 1.5 on a clay loam soil. Do not listen to this extension specialist anymore. This should wean you off of that mess. Guess what? Plant deeper. Plant deeper when you're early. Why? Dewey Lee, and where are you, Dewey? Right there. He's going to tell you the right stuff here, because I mentioned this to him, and he said, wetting and drying. He already knew it. Randy Downey already knew it. Yes, indeed. 2.5 inches, you get a much more uniform moisture content. The soil doesn't warm and cool as quickly. That moisture content is more stable. 1.5 inches, that thing dries out, wets up, dries out, wets up. Dewey's going to tell you how, if you want to plant 1.5, you can solve this. Guys, plant deeper. So if you've already learned something here today, haven't you? You didn't think you would, but you did. And I did too. All right, let's move on. How about treatments here? That was the last thing we tried. Was 3-18-18 in furrow, and then we had 2 seed treatments. You can't read them on any of these charts here. Well, yeah, they are. There's the Invigorate, which is an 037-37. It's very similar to Pindalex, and the Prosin, which is a 9-15 with a slight bit of sulfur and zinc. Overall, the 3-18-18, and if you look at these charts and study this very carefully, you'll see this. I'm not going to go through it because it's a little complicated, too hard to follow on this, in the kind of format we got right now. But the 3-18-18 didn't do as well. And it's not total surprise to me. I think that little bit of salt in there is just enough to slow some seed down. Not that I'm not recommending, it doesn't put you out of the ball game. You still get 100% emergence, but as far as getting uniform emergence, it does hurt us. Compared to the Prosin or the Invigorate, that's a small amount of, look where am I at here? Let me do the next chart here. Yeah, well, let me go back. There it is. Look at 1.5 inches at Camden. Again, page 3, the left-hand side chart. Camden, 1.5 inches. Look, the first treatment, and number A is the 3-18-18. The BC is the Invigorate, and the C is the Prosin. Overall, the Prosin did best. The Invigorate was less. Here's the take-home message. You start to study these charts enough, you'll soon see. When you got the right hybrid, planted at the right depth, the seed treatments don't make much difference. But you plant the wrong hybrid at a shallower depth, and the seed treatments make a big difference, start to improve your emergence on that first day quite a bit. So I can see why Randy Dowdy and David Hula use them. It's an insurance policy to make sure they get as many up on that first day as they can. Those seed treatments did make a difference where we had that stress on that emergence. So that's what the bottom line is on seed treatment. Now, before I leave this thing, you know, these ears right here, these are mostly from the Camden location. I just wanted to show you what they look like out here because we didn't have a chance to go out here. Here's the 1456 1.5 inch depth here. This is the initial emergence, 24 hours, 48 hours. I don't think you need a measuring stick, do you? You can tell from there, can't you? All right, here's 1319, and again, this is bad. This is initial, 24 hours, 48 hours. Big difference, isn't there? Variety makes a difference. All right. Let's see. And here's 2.5 inches right here. Compared to those others, this looks really good, doesn't it? So again, initial 24 and 48 hours. So you see here, the point I'm making is, you don't see it in the field. You don't need me to come up here and measure all this stuff for you. If we went to the field and I led you through those plots, you'd see immediately what I'm talking about. And your concern level, I would guarantee you, would go up dramatically there. All right, enough said about that. What did we have trouble with in North Carolina? I've already shown you these charts here. Let's move past that. Well, we had lots of trouble here in North Carolina. You can't hardly see this, but we planted in wet, cold soils last year. We had a lot of, in fact, I think I got that. Yeah, that's the crown rot. That's when you plant corn. It sits in water. You know, Robert Evans said you don't want water on your corn for more than 24 hours. That's when it sits for water for 2 to 3 days. You get crown rot. Or worse, you can get crazy cough or any kind of disease. So that's what happened to us here. We had situations where we had a lot of crown rot, and we tended to overcompensate by planting too shallow. Oh, that hurts me to say that. Because I'm probably the one they were following when they did that. What should they have done? Plant deeper. We just went the wrong way. So anyway, that gives you an idea of what this is. So there's your first secret. There's your first mission, impossible duty, is to change your thinking about how corn comes up. All right, let's do the next thing. Let's manage for high yield. And how are we going to do this? Well, I've talked about this before. Growth. Once we get them up like this, we want them growing rapidly. How do you get seedlings to grow rapidly? Well, again, this is on your picture. You guys, I'm sure many of you were at the spring meetings or winter meetings where I showed this, a 300 bushel yield that we had out in Forsyth County. The difference between my growth and Kevin's growth was dramatic. And I had 300 bushel yield. He had I think it ranged 240, 220. That was all in that zinc that we had in our starter fertilizer. Guys, that's exactly, we've got to make sure we have the right fertility to move that thing, once it's emerged, quickly to that B5 to B7 stage. Now, I told, and you know this, I use brute force in my plots. And you can see that on this page 5 here. I put 19-19-0 on this plot, 20 gallons an acre, another 5 gallons of 3-18-18. I'm using a seed treatment on it. I've got almost, not quite, almost $100 an acre in my starter. Oh, that hurt my pocketbook. And if I had to pay for it, it would really hurt my pocketbook. You guys got to do it cheaper. And so what we've been doing is we've been going out and we've been trying to find different ways of using nutrients in a starter program that promotes early growth but without the volume. You can see there the 3-18-18 I think helps me in the growth factor, but it hurts me in the emergence. I need something that helps me in emergence and then takes over and pushes that seedling on once that seedling is emerged. That's why I like the 3-18-18. Once it's up, that seedling really doesn't lack for much. But it hurts me in a little bit of emergence compared to some of the other things that I could do there. We're going to try to find that. Now, I think I put a picture in here. Let's see. I don't know whether you can see that, and it's not in your handout. Here's what I'm showing on the screen is a shot from one of our plots that in this emergence or this early fertilizer study. And what that shot shows, and you'll have to take my word for it, is that has pretty good ears, but the thing I'm pointing out is that it's got lots of stubble ears. That's the one thing I'm seeing in my treatments is certain, and in this case it has zinc, a little boron, and some magnesium. What I'm seeing in some of these plots is where it really shoots, you know when you get double ears at silky, you've done something to get that corn growing good, because it's wanting to put on a second ear. Now I don't know how much good they'll do yield-wise, but the point I'm saying is we are seeing some treatments that are with just a small amount of micronutrients and a small amount of NP are helping us a lot in getting that early growth. So keep attuned. And we'll show you the data from that here coming up this fall. All right, let me move on here. My time is already flying. All right, here's the next thing. So I've talked about two things already to push that yield toward 5 and what we got to overcome in this mission impossible. Got to get that emergence uniform, we got to get that early growth. And you got to do it economic. That's mission impossible, let me tell you. It's hard, very difficult. Here's the third thing. And it's on page 6 here. Maximum yields are when we capture light for a maximum amount of time. I've said, you know this rule, you should have your corn farmer, this should be invented. Yeah, you should have it tattooed on your arm here someplace, or your wife could do that on for you. Anyway, that's the golden rule of corn farming. Maximum light capture with the least amount of stress. Now that's mission impossible, isn't it? We have to think differently about capturing light. So let's go through this exercise here. I got an exercise for you. You guys are liking your smartphones. I like mine. Let's calculate what it's going to take. In fact, let's just skip to the next slide there, because it's a slide of corn someplace. There it is. There's a cornfield with different populations. Let's look at what it's going to take. I picked these 2 years out of a plot out here. So let me tell you about that plot. It's a it's a twin row corn plot on a 30-inch twin row. It's planted at 46,000 plants to the acre out here. There's these ears. All right. On each of these ears, there's 20 rows. And each row, on average, has 44 seeds. How much is my yield potential? Take the row number, that's 20, times the kernel length of each row, that's 44, times the number of plants in the field, that's 46, and divide by 90, that's like rounding off 3 zeros in each case, that's 90,000 kernels per bushel. How many bushels per the acre do I have? Well, you're going to make me do it, aren't you? You didn't think I had myself on, did you? How much? 400? 450. 46,000. Think about this a little while. 46,000 plants. Would you be ashamed to have this year in 30,000? I would not. So how are you going to make 500 bushel yield? What are you going to have to do? You got to push that population a little more, don't you? And indeed, that's what it's going to take. You've got to have high population. If the mass doesn't go anywhere. You've got to be able to support a high plant population here. So how in the world do I do that? How do I support a high plant population in order to get 500 bushel yield of these ears? And by the way, I got them out of 46,000. These can be done. That should be a 450 yield now. Here's the secret: not every one of them was this good. So anyway, but I'm assuming you can do that. I can't, but I'm assuming you can. But I ain't still not at 500 bushel. I got to go to 49, don't I? Recalculate that at 49. It's 507. 507 bushel. I need 49,000 plants to get this job done. So, how do I do that? Well, here's the things I think we're gonna focus on. First of all, the right hybrid. There. It's on this chart here down on page 7, upper right-hand or left-hand corner. I got right and left mixed up. Now, what you're seeing there are different hybrids. The one on the left is 6949. The one next to it is 6805 decaf. The one in the middle is 1690 Pioneer. The one to the right of it is Pioneer 2088. And the one to the right of that is Pioneer 1498. These are 3-year data, and those tallest bars there that are showing on this chart, particularly under 1690, the 68 and the 2088, are 300 bushel yields. What we've seen time and time again is in order to go to capture as much light, you've got to have a hybrid that gets tall and gets those leaves out there to capture. David Hula knows this, Randy Dowdy knows this. You've got to get the right hybrid. So it starts with getting a lot of leaves up high and capturing, getting those leaf areas separated so you can get some light into that leaf area, or ear leaf, let me say it right, ear leaf zone in the canopy in order to really maximize yield. And in our neck of the woods, the 1690 and David Hula's used the 2088 to make 400 and some bushel yield. So indeed, the right hybrid. Now, remember I said capture maximum light without stress. Now this is great when we're thinking about 500 bushel yield, because how many of you think we're going to make 500 bushel yield without irrigation? Or some surface irrigation, or some kind of irrigation? Good. None of you, because that truly is mission impossible to do it without some kind of irrigation or supplemental water. Now, I'm sure one of you will come to me in about 5 years and show me your yield ticket and say I did it. And I'll, again, feel stupid. But truly today, I say if you want 500 bushel, you gotta have water available. So, yeah. But if I don't have irrigation, and I still want a 300, and that can be done, you can make 300 bushel without irrigation. If I want that yield level, then then I got to think hard about what hybrid I want. I don't need that tall hybrid then. I need something like a 6805 or something with a little shorter stature that's going to conserve some water for me. So hybrid is important in that thing. Seeding rate, of course, I just talked about that, so I can skip over that. That's row spacing. And that's what I'm showing on one of these. Here it is behind me. We did a row spacing thing here. Once you get up to those 40,000, I did a lot of row spacing work, 10 years of row spacing work. And on average, certainly 20-inch rows are better than 30s. A 36-inch row is someplace between a 30 and a 20. At the populations I used, which ranged from 20 to about 36,000, it was pretty standard. But let me tell you, once you think outside of that population range, when you start thinking 49,000, you better doggone well think about row spacing. You're going to have to separate those plants. And you go out there and look at those plots out there. And my little twin row 30s or twin 36 look pretty good at 46,000 over here. My 22s don't look so hot. So that extra spacing I get in a twin row at that very high population, actually I think is helping. And that's why I think Randy Dowdy gets, I thought, oh, he's silly using a twin row. But I think when he's talking about the kind of high populations he does, he probably has a better point than I gave him credit for there. So indeed, plant type, plant population, plant spacing. Those are all important. And of course, the last thing I'm going to jump to here is, whoops, passed it right by, is, guys, equal plant spacing. I've shown this before. And many of you take it to heart. You got your planters in tip-top condition, so it's putting a seed right where it needs to go every time, a picket fence stand. Don't forget about that when you're putting that extra bushel or two on at 500 bushel. Well, it's actually 5 bushel decline for every inch you're out of perfect. So that's 5 bushels every time you miss it. So don't forget that part of it. So those are all things that we got to think about to get the kind of yields that we got to get. Now finally, last thing that I got to say, and that's, I mentioned it already, and that's about water. Guys, and I think Randy, I think Dewey, he's going to shoot me now. I think Dewey Lee is going to tell you the best secret you're ever going to hear about how to handle water. Here's what I'm going to say about that, and then I'm going to turn it over to him as the expert. If you're irrigating in a season like this, don't get behind. You don't catch up. Chad Poole down at Pamlico the other day was talking about a new subsurface irrigation system they put in, and he says once you get behind on that soil moisture at the 12-inch depth, you'll never, he doesn't care how much water you pump in those ditches. You'll never get it back up. And that's true under irrigation as well. This is why Randy Dowdy has such an aggressive irrigation approach. He cannot afford to get behind at those kind of populations. You've got to be proactive in your irrigation approach. Now, for us, there's another caveat to us. On the other hand, don't over-irrigate. Last year, I saw a few fields where the irrigation rig was making a track 18 inches deep in the muck, and it was still running. Guys, that's the same as what Bob Evans just talked about with saturated fields. You're creating a poorly drained situation that can't drain fast enough. So we've got to balance an aggressive and proactive irrigation against the drainage, because we can get 3-inch or 6-inch rains. So it's a bit, and again, I'm not saying this is easy. It's mission impossible. But I think you got to recognize and come up with an idea or system in order to address that issue there. All right, let me let me push ahead here. I got 5 minutes, and I do want to talk about one last point. Jump ahead to page 11 here. See if I can get this set up right here. All right. Finally, we got to keep this corn green. Yes, I know. Once it reaches, somebody said, well, once it reaches black layer, I don't need it green. You're exactly right. I don't need it green, but I need it green up to black layer time. And too often we're yellow or a little off color coming up to black layer. I got 3 things there in that page 11 up there that I think we need to think about as we think about keeping this corn going to black layer. First of all, plenty of nitrogen available. If many of you are doing through the pivot or doing multiple nights, that's a good plan, because I think even up to R2, we can do a good job of supplementing a little nitrogen. 30 pounds at R2 would be plenty to help this corn keep moving along. So I like it. If you can penny spoon feed nitrogen, that's a good thing. Above all, monitor it. You know, monitor what's going on out there. If your nitrogen levels are falling below 3%, you need to be concerned about that. The second thing, and I think Jim Dumpy mentioned this, I'm concerned about our potassium levels. Most of our corn out here, and Carl showed you what potassium, doesn't that look like senescent corn that he showed you? That leaf margin starts to burn up, and then it starts to move in, and pretty soon that leaf's gone. We put that off to senescence, but what it really is a potassium. When you got a big heavy load, you're running out of potassium. Your potassium and nitrogen should, on your tissue test, and you need to take tissue tests if you're really looking to really understand your high yield corn, should show potassium and nitrogen percentages very close to each other. They don't have to be the same, and potassium usually be slightly less, but they should be close. If one gets out of balance with the other, you're going to have stock lodging. You'll have beautifully green corn all laying on the ground. So that's critical as we think about late season, is how much potassium. And then, of course, keep these diseases. And we got problems with southern rust again this year. Fungicides, I think, in a high yield program do have a significant role, and I do think they're pay for themselves. I've got a chart here on page 9 or 12 here that shows the effect of fungicides applied to B8, and you can see that compared to the untreated, which is the very first bar, 215 was the untreated check, and we got up to 239, 243 on a couple of those fungicides. Let me move forward to that chart, see if you can see it on the screen here. I'm getting ahead of myself here. Come on here. Oh, there it is. Whoa. Yeah, there it is. Yeah. Praxor, the Approach, or the Quilt XL, all looked really good in that crop. This is B8. There ain't much. Those leaves look pretty good when I applied this. I didn't see any disease here. Yet, because southern rust came in early, because it's helped me, I think, protect this leaf area, I did get some significant yield results out of it. All right, let me. I'm all out of time here. Let me jump to my last slide here. All right, mission, should you choose to accept it. Guys, the last thing I want to say about comparing your system with that Randy Dowdy or David Hula uses to get 400 or 500 bushel yield is they look at their corn every single day, and they say, when they look at that corn, what will it need tomorrow? They have the ability to look at corn today and say, I think I'm going to be out of nitrogen in another 30 days. I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen. They got the ability to look at corn today and say, I'm going to be out of potassium or zinc or sulfur, or they need another fungicide. And they are able to proactively apply and keep that corn moving along. That's the only way to 500 bushel. You can't do it monthly, it can't be done weekly, it's daily. Go to that field and look at that corn and say, what will it need, not today, tomorrow? And then make a plan. Now, I've got some things here I think I point out for that plan. Quick uniform start. When you go out first thing, you are counting how when it comes up. Second of all, how fast did it reach B7? emphasize light. Is it getting, am I canopied quickly? Am I getting enough capture of light? Is that dark ground that I'm looking on, or am I seeing light all over the surface of that soil? Water, am I too aggressive? Am I expecting too much rain in the next 20, 15, 10 days? Or am I just not being aggressive enough? Balancing nutrients, take a tissue sample at B7, another at BT, another at R3. Am I balanced? Have I got what I need? That's how I tell what I need in the future. And then fungicides. How green is this crop? How good is it doing? Do I need to make sure that I have it covered as far as diseases? So guys, I think there is a lot to be said about this 500 bushel yield. And I think that you guys can indeed accomplish Mission Impossible. It's hard. There's not a single step here that's easy. But I think you guys are just as good as any farmer, any grower out there. And not listening to stupid extension specialists, why you are going to make it. Thanks.
Okay, that's fine. We're going to transition. Dewey's going to get his presentation up. I will say this, we are going to get the evaluation forms out here in a second. So as we go through the last presentation, take time to fill that out, and we'll collect them. And like I said, we're going to do some door prizes at the end. We kind of took a chance this year. We've done something a little different. Obviously, going into the afternoon with the tour is different, and I appreciate you guys sticking around. But I believe you stuck around because we had an interesting topic to discuss, and I think that has helped. So one of the other things we wanted to do was reach outside of our borders and start tapping into some of this other talent that's around us, that some of these other universities and some of these renowned guys that you've heard of. Every one of you have heard about Randy Dowdy, and most likely if you read enough, you found out that he was talking to somebody named Dr. Dewey Lee at University of Georgia and how he was helping him out. So it's probably expensive to get Randy Dowdy here, but I felt like this is just as good. Let's get the guy that taught Randy some of what he did to come and talk to us, and I think that's what we're going to accomplish this afternoon. Dr. Dewey Lee is a professor and extension range agronomist at the University of Georgia. He's come a long ways. He stayed a nice bread breakfast last night. It's almost as good as a Holiday Inn, right? So he knows a lot. He's going to tell us. And what we'll do at the end, I know there's going to be some questions. I feel like there will be. So once you finish, and we'll get Ron Hyder to come back, and we'll try to do a few questions and answers maybe together. And who knows, there might be someone else who wants to jump in that as well. We'll save the questions there to the end. So Dr. Dewey Lee.
Ron, thank you a lot. Let me see if I can get this thing up. There we go. That's a little bit better. Let's see if I can make sure that I can get this working pretty well. Well, Ron called me. You know, I've heard Ron talk a lot about this particular area. I'm always envious of you guys because you have people like Ron and Carl, excellent scientists, absolutely excellent scientists. I have Ron over a number of times, and I certainly appreciate it because he always has something to share, and that's the great thing about it. I know Jim, gee whiz, I hear about Jim over here, you know. Jim Dunphy, of course. I can't believe he's old as he is. You know, I've been there a long time, and then I got to start thinking about it. When I first started this job, I had a lot of black hair and a lot of hair. I don't have any left, okay? And I appreciate you guys hanging in this afternoon because this, to me, I've lived this for such a long time. And coming over here in a beautiful area, beautiful farm, beautiful weather. In fact, I told Ron earlier in Rod, I said, man, this feels like home. It's hot, it's humid. The only thing that's lacking is gnats. You don't have gnats. I wish you had them. Then you'd understand my suffering, Guys, it's really, when you start thinking about this, it does seem like a mission impossible. And when Rod, asked me to come over, I told him, sure, I'm always up to try to talk about corn production in a way that somewhat is a bit unfamiliar to you, to be honest with you. And I understand why. And I've been working this crop for a long time, 35 years. And I hope I have a number of years to go, to be honest with you. But about 10 years ago, a young man called me up, and he says, I understand you're the corn specialist. And I said, yes, I am. He says, I want to grow corn. I said, okay, we've grown corn before. He goes, no. I said, oh, geez. I said, well, we could talk all day long. I said, rather than talking all day long, I said, I'm going to send you a guide. I want you to read it twice. I want you to read it first time through, underline some things, make a little yellow highlighter, whatever you want to do. I said, but highlight it and read it again. And then think about what you have read and what you have underlined in context of what you've read. And see if you've answered your own question first. And then call me. And I didn't know this guy at all. He just called me up. I sent him. He said, sure, I'll do that. Well, I didn't know that he worked for Homeland Security. Okay? I didn't know that he was trained to pay attention to details. And when you work for Homeland Security, you are trained. He had advanced degrees. He was somewhat anal, as Ronnie's already said. But he was to the point, he's direct, and he's always asking the right kind of question. Well, he said, dear, I just want to grow irrigated corn. He says, I got a little farm, I want to get started at it. And he says, it's actually just a play farm for me. He says, I got a full-time job. Well, advanced a couple of years, he gets hurt, and now he's farming full-time. The one thing that I think is a disadvantage for you guys, and the one thing I've told Ronnie, I said, Randy had the advantage over every one of you. And I usually say it's because he was new. You didn't grow up on a farm. See, when we grow up on a farm, when we grow into this particular environment, we have, like Ron was talking about, some preconceived ideas. In fact, science and what he told you now, I'm going to take a little exception to what you said, Ron. And the reason is I think you've been too hard on yourself. All right? I really do. I really think you've been too hard. Now, the reason is because when we got started, we were doing the mid-300s. All right? And the next thing I know, somebody breaks a little bit 400, and every time, Randy's right there with him, being an eye. And I realized at this point in time, the science has gotten us so far. We needed innovators. We needed people who challenged the status quo. And that's the important part, is being able to challenge yourself when you think you have seen it all and it's not going to work for you because you've got something in your mind saying, it's just not going to work. And Ron was doing that, and I was doing that. And the great thing about it is you've got some scientists like Carl and Ron and Jim over here that are challenging themselves as you challenge them. And I will tell you right now, and Ron's not going to mind me saying this, is challenge them. Challenge them to the questions and to the answers that they have as you see information react on your farm. Now here's what I want you to do. Because my slides, I put 3 slides on a page and you can't see the graphs very well. You certainly can't see them out here. And I know that the people here didn't understand that and didn't see that coming. My email, Ron's going to say, oh Lord. I'm going to give you my email. It's Dewey Lee. It's one word, DEWEYLEE. I'm going to regret it. I hope I regret it. How about that? Dewey Lee, DEWEYLEE, at UGA.edu. That stands for University of Georgia.edu. And if you want this presentation, I'll put it in a PDF. Now, your email needs to be able to accept about 2 megs of data, okay, because these graphs are large. But feel free to email me and just say, hey, I was there at the BLACKLAND tour. Can you send me your slides? And I'll be happy to do that. Now, I'll tell you something else. The other thing that I want you to do, at the same time you email me, and promise me this, that you'll get online and you go to Iowa State Extension, okay? And you pick up Corn Growth and Development book, all right? Corn Growth and Development, and that's the Iowa State. It costs you $14. Why? Why do I want you to get this booklet? Well, it lays out the bones. It lays out the growth and the development of a crop that you will massage a little bit So that as you listen to Ron and you listen to scientists that talk about specifics, you can go back to this book and begin to realize that it's affecting what? Growth and development. And that's what this is about, guys. It's all about understanding the path to high yields. Well, let me make sure I got it. Here we go. If we understand the path to high yields, in other words, what we want to do, we understand the path of corn growth and development. And when we do that, now we begin to get it. Why? Because years ago, we didn't think anything about that ear, that small ear. Now, why in the world would something like simple emergence affect the ear? When does the ear develop? Well, you know, those rows are finally determined around that B7 stage, that B6, that B7 stage. My gosh. Why would coming up make a difference? It happens to be growing debris units, growing debris days. It happens to be how much energy is going to be the number of cells. We're talking about the number of cells in a plant. That's what we're talking about. And how it captures light. We're talking about, and the reason is because of the time. This is a determinate plant. In other words, by the time we get to a V6 or V7 stage, no more leaf tissue, guys. It has set. The cells are there. It's cell elongation and expansion. And that's the solar system for these plants to be able to produce the carbohydrates, to produce enough food to fill that ear that is already set. And so every day, as Ron was talking about, every day is just as important as the next one and as the one you just previously went through in the growth of this crop. Now, here's what I like thinking about. I hope it's right. Yeah. The slide I have up, and you can't see it, was a survey. This was a quote, and I'll read it to you. It was a survey by Dan Kleinfelter. Dan is a professor over at Texas A&M. And what he did was he surveyed the top CEOs of agricultural companies across the country. He wanted to know what was it that made them competitive. And when I read this, I realized it's the same way with a farm. It's the same thing with you as the top manager, as you as the owner. And I will quote it. It's reject the status quo and operate in a continuous mode of improvement. Reject the status quo. Every farmer in here now, that's something that we have to do. Wow, you got 30 years, 40 years, and you can't get more than 250, 260, 270 bushels. Right now, we're harvesting in Georgia. We're very, very fortunate. Southwest part of the state, we're averaging somewhere between 230 and 290 bushels an acre on irrigation. We're having a pretty good year. And we may meet and maybe exceed our state average this year. What I try to tell a grower is be willing to reject that status quo. Why? Because it's about learning. It's about becoming a student of this crop. I see soybeans out here. All right? I've seen tobacco, I've seen cotton, peanuts, and corn. If you're raising cattle, you're raising hogs, you're raising poultry, become that student. Because if you do, now you're willing to challenge what you know because something's not working right. If you're just hanging in there 240, 250 bushels, I told Ron, this year I've had more growers send me video and pictures of their yield monitor from 320, 350, 360, 380 bushels. Now we'll be north of 400, but I don't know if we'll make 500 on. I don't know about that this year. But when a grower that's got 800, 900 acres, 1,000 acres, and when I call him up and I say, how did it go this year? How did this harvest? And I don't know, it's all right. What do you think you're going to do? Oh, about 260 bushels. 270. I'm sorry. I said, man, you got to be excited about that. Yeah, he says, but I did something wrong, and I think I know where I went wrong this year. I like that. It's kind of hard to feel that way, even though it's $5 a bushel. It's still kind of hard to feel that way when you harvest 250, 260 bushels on the average across that. And I appreciate the way they think. The reason now, this slide, this is a growth and development timeline. Okay? And this is what I want you to, why I want you to get that book. Because that timeline will be in this book. I got permission to use it. But what I did was, I went in and I placed, later on in this slide, you will not be able to see it, all the specifics under each time frame and why this is so blasted important. Because if you miss it, you're behind. You have to think about what the theoretical genetic potential of this crop is. Well, we know it's more than 500 bushels already. And now, get this guys, when he's harvesting it, he's seeing that yield monitor go popping 600. All right, now, so this is an average. The 500 was an average. So you know, when that yield's popping 600, there's something else going on here that kept him from averaging 500. Well, you have to understand the growth and the development. So that's why if you get this, we'll begin to learn and see what that is. This is a yield map, and here again, what I want you to see is I took this from Paul Bowenstein. He worked with David Hu a little bit. He gave me permission to use this, and it is a yield map for 240 bushels. And I just changed the slide to a yield map for 300 bushels. And in it, what you'll see is number of rows, number of kernels per row, number of ears per acre, and test weight. Every yield component is represented in this yield map. Test weight makes a difference. Now, I walked in some fields this morning before getting here, and I went through and I started counting rows and looking at the number of kernels. And I was looking, okay, what happened? And I haven't been, to North Carolina and hadn't talked with Ron, but I said, Ron, it looks like that your early maturing material, the real early maturing material was a little too early. You got into a little dry spell. And your later maturing materials actually hit the water at about the right time, but you've continued to get good rainfall. And I think hopefully that's a pretty decent assessment of it. And the reason is now I'm seeing what's going to be some pretty good test weight material out here. See, when you understand this crop, then you can start putting together the things that it takes to get 350 bushels, 375, 400, whatever it might be, to move you from a 200, 240, 250, 275. Now you begin to put all those kinds of things together, and that's what we're trying to do. What are all the things that will affect that? And guys, it's an equation. The equation is simply genetics by environment. That's why we see different responses in genetics. Because they're going to what? Interact with the environment. What about the environment? Well, let's look at all our inputs. This is the way I like to tell our inputs. Inputs are A, B, C, D, and E. What's A? What's B? You put it together. I don't care. A, B, C, D, and E. And that interacts with, that's the environment, and that's going to interact with genetics. Now guess what? The effect that A has this year is going to be different than next year. The effect that B has this year is going to be different than next year. And the effect that A and B together, okay, I'd like to put it off, that A and B together may be synergistic. In other words, you can't always add A and B and get the same effect. So that's why I like challenging, and Ron challenges me and I challenge him, and Jim and Carl. It's because we have to try to put this together. And a lot of you will ask this question, well, wait a minute, I don't want to add that input if I don't think it's economical. I get that. But when you're trying to move the yield on your farm, you need to put these things together. It's sort of like seed treatment. And it's the seed treatment's interaction with a hybrid. These guys do that for a reason, because they don't know when that treatment is going to be needed. And it doesn't cost much. Now, I'll tell you right now, the cost of that 500 bushel was, pardon me if I get it wrong, but Randy can straighten me out right now, but it's about $1,326 an acre. When you make 500 bushels, well, that's okay. Okay? He risked that. $1,300 bucks. Well, your cost may be around $700 or $800. Don't be afraid. Do your own experimentation. Do not be afraid to challenge the status quo. Now, I'm not going to go through this, but if you take, as Ryan was showing you, an average test weight is the third, all right, so you look to your right, the far column to the right, besides the little box. At 300 bushels, that's 40,000 plants. And it's going to vary how many rows per kernel, kernels per row that you're going to get, whether it's 14, 16, 18, or 20. But if you take 40,000 plants at a 56,000 pound test weight, and you assume 80,000 kernels on a per bushel basis, it takes 24 million kernels, okay? That's what it takes to give you 300 bushels. Okay. I go through in fields all the time and calculating yields. But look, if you just, and this year it looks like you've got some pretty good test weight, and it's not hard to get 60-pound test weight in a corn crop. Not when you have good water. It only takes 37,000 plants to do that. So you see how the interaction is taking place? So please understand that even if you have a problem at emergence, or even if you have a problem in the season, not all is lost. When Randy first started this, son of a gun, made 260-something bushels. The next year he made 274. He said, "Dude, can I do 300? I said, "Sure, maybe. I don't know." I was really specific, wasn't I? Yeah. And I said, "But it's harder." Well, he did. He made 314. He said, "Think I can break that?" I said, "Yeah, I do." I said, "I'm not sure how." I said, "Because when we reviewed it, you were doing everything right." He did 356, then 374, and then 417, and then 474, and then 503. That son of a gun, I don't know where he's going to stop. But he's not stopping. He's always challenging things. He's always looking, and as Ronnie said, every day. He makes a change according to where that plant is at that specific time. Well, now here's what's important. Now, I put up that growth and development timeline, and I do this very, very specifically. That's why I asked you, get online, find it, $14. It'll be a great $14 that you can spend. Do you know how to count leaves? Do you know how to actually age the plant? That's what's important. If you know how to age the plant, and if you don't, then learn it this next year. It's learning the collar. You want to look for the uppermost mature leaf that has a visible collar. If the other one's tucked into that visible collar, like my neck is right here, then that is not a leaf yet, fully developed leaves. So we want to start from the very beginning. Leaf 1, when it emerges. And then leaf 2, and 3, and 4, and 5, and 6. You keep a record. You keep a record of the growing degree. Oh, and Ron, let me ask you a question, guys. Do you have a weather station? Do you have a place that y'all can go and get growing degree units on a daily basis? You do?
Every county has weather stations, either at the airport, Little Washington has one at the airport, there's one here at Bellhaven.
All right, so Ron, explain to me where some of these weather stations are. You find the weather station that's closest to you, and you look at that information. You're going to look at that information. Reason is because that's going to help you keep up with where that plant is and what kind of influence you can have on it. That's extremely important. It is very, very important. Why? Because if you do exactly what Ron's telling you, you're going to get more plants up at the same time. And you're going to have the largest effect by understanding where that crop is. The uppermost mature leaf is going to give you some kind of indication of what that crop is going to be needing next. Okay? And what you don't want to do is, and can you see little red dots? No, you can't see red dots. Okay, I'm sorry. If you can see the red dots, I put a red dot on each of the most mature leaves. Okay, it's got a collar on it. And that's meant to kind of give you a visual aid as to how to count those. The next slide shows you 2 that have died. Okay? And you can't probably, oh, I didn't get to it. You'll see on the bottom there's 2 leaves that have died. So when you're counting leaves, by the time you get to a B5 or a B6 leaf, what I would want you to do this next year, remember, is paint it. Paint it a bright orange, put your spot, and do several of them in a row. Put your spot so that you can always walk back to that same area in the field. And in that way, once you see how many leaves have died, Now you'll have an accurate way to be able to get to V10, V11, V12. So if you've got a question, you call somebody up and they ask you, hey, what stage you at? You go out there and you count and you say, I'm at V6. What? And you know the darn thing is a month and a half old? You know, you're 45 to 60 days along? No, you're a little bit further along than that. So you'll, one, give you a visual cue as to what the real age of that plant is, so you can count. So that's important, all right? So I want you to be able to count that. The next thing I want you to understand is energy is driving the engine. Energy is driving that engine, and what is that? That is heat, and that's light. Now, what I've got on these screens is the formula on growing degree unit accumulation in corn. This is extremely important because from the time you get a leaf to emerge, to the time you get all the way to about that V10 stage, it's going to take about 84 growing degree units, roughly about 84. And as you kind of work with this, you'll see that's about right. And then once you get past that, it's about a 55, 56, 54, depending on the hybrid, on V10 all the way up, V11 all the way up to silver stage. You'll say, now, dude, that's a lot of work. Well, no, not really. Once you get that area where you can reliably go to, and you go out, and if you're doing it every day, you'll see it. So it's extremely important to be able to map this crop. And quite honestly, let's just say this is a beginning for you. I would ask that every corn grower do that this next year. If that's all you do, if you don't know how to count leaves and don't know how to accumulate the growing degree units, let's just do that. That's becoming a student of this crop. That's gaining knowledge. And when you do this, then you'll be able to, guess what? You know what you'll do? You'll see things you've never seen before. See, when you go out on an everyday basis, you'll see something that you've never seen before. And you'll start learning why this crop is so particular and how you can move from 250 bushel yield to 325. And you can bump it in a year. You can take that. This crop is waiting for you to do that kind of thing to it. Now, when you do that, I want you to map it over years. Come on. Here is 4 years. And I just got mine, and they may be bold enough, and they may not. I apologize. But what I did was map 4 years, and you can do that at your own place. And 2015 is mapping just like 2012 was. 2013, 2014 were very cold. Ron, it took us, at one time, in between these years, it took us 17 days longer to reach V4 stage. In 1 year comparison, 17 days. So if you're just in your mind averaging a plant growth in 17 days, 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Instead of a V4, I was at a V7 stage 1 year in that period of time. I had enough heat units to advance us that far. So that can tell you something like that. If you don't understand the physiology of this plant, it is hard to move the yield needle. But once you start learning these types of things, now you're beginning to understand how these products are going to work, or how these hybrids are going to vary from year to year, or why deep tillage and a sandy soil is exceedingly important, or why roots, when roots are growing and they're growing in a pancake rather than growing deep into that soil profile, why that's important. As you understand the physiology, as you understand the growing degree units, as you understand leaf tissue and its growing and its building. Guys, this is extremely important. So now we get an average. And so you can kind of anticipate in a year, you can anticipate when the next 2 leaves are going to, when they're going to make. Now, why is that important, guys? It's important because of this. Ron and I talk about V4 stage, V5 stage, and V6 stage. When it's a warm year, in 6 days, I can go from V4 to V6. Now, let me ask you a question. You've seen, if you walk out into your field and you have a deficiency, and it's at a V4 stage, and there's a deficiency, and it's nasty, it's raining, you can't get out in the field. 3 days later, guess what? You're at V5. the plant's beginning to form that ear. You maybe get a quarter of an acre done in a day. I mean, a quarter of your acreage done in a day. Now you'd be 6. All right? The plant doesn't stop. It doesn't wait for you. So if we can't get to out, and we can get out in that field, you know what's going to happen? We're going to be behind. Not only are we going to be behind, we've already lost yield. That's why this thing is from the very beginning, from the very day that you plant, you don't stop going out in that field unless it's raining. And even then you go out there and look at it. So it's taking a different mindset than where you've been with it. So corn is a determinate plant because once we get out of that vegetative state, in that vegetative state, we're laying the framework, the groundwork, out of the 3 of the 4 stages. Now, you can imagine what Ron's talking about. If you've got a plant that's coming up, in that first 24-hour period of time, when it emerges, the amount of light and the amount of energy that it can use to produce a root and to start growing roots gives that crop, gives that one plant 24 hours more time to absorb nutrients, to grow a larger leaf, to add more cells, to give you more, photosynthetic layer, to give you more yield. That's why it works this way. That's why it works. Because it's not just all of a sudden, bang, you got an ear. It's laying the framework, the groundwork for that. And that's why this is so blasted important. I like to say, what is the theoretical yield of corn? And I put it in, and I kind of read this for you on the bottom so you'll see this. I asked the question, 500 bushels? No, 600 bushels, 700 bushels? I don't know. I don't know what the theoretical yield is. I've asked readers, and they tell me different things. But here's what I do know. I've been working with Dr. Joe Ritchie, who is a modeler. And Joe came out to the fields this year. And he surprised me a little bit. He had been asking me about all the information on Randy's fields. And he said, I gave him everything that I could. And Randy was gracious to him and to give him the information. And Randy said, well, dear, I don't need anybody to tell me what I made. I know exactly what I made. I said, well, yeah, you do. I said, but you can help us in science, okay? And Joe put all the information into his crop model and done it. He came up to me and he said, dear, he says, we got exactly what Randy got. He said, we were at $4.99 plus or minus some bushels. And he says, and what it is he created, and this goes along with exactly with what Ron's talked about, light. He created, or he allowed that plant to reach maximum photosynthetic area, 4.3 grams of dry matter per megajoule of radiation. Now I know that sounds pretty fancy, all right? But what it means is that his leaf surface and the amount of carbohydrates going into the ear that was made was near the maximum, according to what our science tells us right now. So, you can walk away with confidence when you start to understand what Ron's talking about, getting that plant up. Okay? Getting that plant up and getting it emerged in that first 24 hours. A harvest insect, and he planted 50,000 plants. All right, so if you've never heard him talk, he used 50,000 plants. He was in twin rows. He tilled under both rows. He did everything that Ron's talking about. He used some seed treatments. He used fertilizer, banded fertilizer. He sprayed. He kept it watered. He watched it every day. He made a nutritional profile of that crop, was balanced all the way across it. There was still some room to grow. He and I both would see some mistakes that he made. He had some potash deficiencies in some of it, in fact, which surprised me. But it was taking up some blasted much potash. And then when you do that, guys, you're realizing, as much potash he had 400 pounds down. It was picking up a lot. It was eating up a tremendous amount. But you have to have it there to get there. All right. Next slide, this is simply this. It's just stress. These are just stress slides. And I make a statement and I'm going to read it. It's a producer's goal is to produce a profit, but often fail to reduce all the stress when possible. When you're in this situation, you just want to reduce stress. Alleviate it as much as you can. And when you got black soils like this and drainage, you can't do a darn thing about too much water. But you got drainage, and that's important. But when you can apply water, that's even better. Because this crop uses a specific amount of water every day, and if you can max that, then it'll never stress on you, and that's what's important. The next slide I have is simply this. This is not to think about stress in this environment, okay? It's not the time to think about it when you see the problem. It's the time to think about it before you see the problem and be ready to react to that. How many times, you can't react to something if you don't have irrigation. In other words, you got to fly a fungicide home, but if you got irrigation, you can apply it to the system. Ron, you talked about having so much water that you lost nitrogen this year. Well, I hate to say this, but when the ground was saturated, I've applied water with nitrogen because I knew I had to. I knew I had to, and that's not thinking like a farmer. I hate to say it's not thinking like a farmer, but it's thinking like a plant. Because now you can't do that here. In a sandy soil, within 24-hour period of time, we're going to reoxygenate that soil. We lose that much water through that profile. We're going to reoxygenate it. When we do that, that nitrogen's going to be right there for that plant to take up. Because if you've got an inch, or say 1.2 inches of water holding capacity, and your infiltration rate is 1.2 inches, okay, if you're in on a per hourly basis, guess what, guys? If you get that kind of rainfall, you got nitrogen there, nitrates, where's it going to go? In a sandy soil, we can move that stuff 6 inches. Holy mackerel. We will move nitrogen below a root zone. So we must react early. It's not that, okay, we've got enough nitrogen out there. It's where is it? And is the plant going to get it? That's what you got to think about. You have to think ahead. You have to be aware and be in front of that stress. Now I'm going to quickly go through several things, and then I'll get to another bulk of what I want to address. Here's what I want you to take a look at it. All right, this right now is that time that you think about the stress and what it can do. Stress, you'll see, when you start looking at ears this year, I want you to look at it. I want you to closely examine all the ears on your plant. I want you to see if there are some areas that are scrambled here. All right? In other words, maybe are some rows collapsed. In other words, you had 18 rows, and then about halfway up, it turned to 16 rows. Okay? Have any of you ever seen that in your fields? Okay, yeah. So somebody just think 14 rows or 16 rows, or they collapsed down to 12 or 18, they collapsed down into 16, about halfway up. And guess what? You know when that occurred? That occurred between that D7 and D8 stage. Not when the ear was filling. It occurred much, much earlier, when the ear was forming. Now, you may see a zipper line along here. Okay? Yeah, now that is during that silking phase. That's when that occurred. Or you'll see it pinch here at the top. Or maybe you'll see nothing right here. And it's a stubby root. It's a stubby one. That may have come from the fact that we used a surfactant on a fungicide. And we went out there and sprayed somewhere between a V14 and a V at silking stage. Okay? Some of these petroleum products have an arresting effect. We have sprayed a fungicide right at the silking phase, and unfortunately the grower used a surfactant. It has an arresting effect. Pinched it, stopped it, makes a little hourglass shape. If it were a Barbie doll, that would be okay, but not a corn crop. All right? That's what we want to avoid. But the only way to avoid is to understand, is simply just to understand that growth and that development. So, I go through and I talk about ear size, ear numbers, and how stress is going to affect it, and how a corn crop can literally diagnose itself for you. It's trying to tell you something, all right? It's going to try to tell you something. Here You may not see it, but I've broken down the number of kernels basically on a per row basis when they're formed on a per year. Okay. Now, there's two parentheses here. When I send this back to you, you'll see a V6, V7, and you'll see a V7, V9 phase. There's some argument in our science of when that's happening, when those rows are going to be developing, the kernel rows per year. I'm winning the argument. Ron's winning the argument. It's a lot earlier here. At a V6, V5, the health of that plant from that V4 to that V6 stage sets the stage for the number of rows. Yes, the number of rows are determined in that V7 stage, but it's the earlier stress that negatively affects that period of time. Why? Because it's energy. We're talking about how deep the roots are, how much nutrients are coming up, how it's feeding that whole leaf, and how much energy is going to be involved from that point on. It is setting the stage. Now, is it all over with, heavens? No, because now we have a number of kernels on a per row basis to get us there if we don't have enough kernels at that point in time. I wanted to show you this one right here. Can you see that? It's sort of, this is a V9 stage. That is a ear at node 14 at a V9 stage. And you'll see just these little round ridges that are formed along that ear. Right? Every ridge separates into two. That's why the number of rows are even on a corn. So I'm looking anywhere from 8 to 10 ridges to form at that stage. When I get 8 to 10, I'm a happy camper. Because that means there's 16 to 20 rows. That's what I'm looking at. Because it divides into two. When you look further, by the time we get to a B12 stage, and that's what you're looking at now, at that B12 stage, man, we've got about 20 kernels already formed at that time. And see, that's how too much water, not enough water. Fungicides. Why, these early fungicides, you were showing, Ron, you were showing some of your work at V8 stage on the fungicide. What's happening is some of the phenomena we really don't understand. I'm going to tell you something, we don't get it. We don't fully understand. And this is what's going on right now in our science, in our world, is being able to put together this formula, these formulations, these equations to kind of give you real answers. But we know when we put them all together, every year is a little different on its effect, but one adds value to the next one. That's why you can't piecemeal this together. You have to do your own work on your own farm. Do not be afraid. Don't be afraid to experiment. Don't be afraid to call your scientists. All right? They'll get back with you. Call your carrier. Get them involved and get them working on your behalf to be able to put this together so that now you'll be disappointed at 270 bushel corn. I want you all to be disappointed with it. All right? Now, let me just keep going through it. I want to get to a couple of slides. Here's a bar graph. The very far graph on the very far bar on the right. Okay, the number's about 256 right there. That's a V8 bar. All right. In other words, the bar to the left is no treatment, 291 bushels. The V2, V3, the second from the left is 292. The next one's 296. The next one's 293, and the next one's 256. That's the last one. And all this is timing of a herbicide. That's it. Simple timing of a herbicide. When you get beyond its label, in this case, Roundup and Atrazine, guys, we lost 40 bushels in 1 year. And this was almost 300 bushel corn. Okay. What happened? Well, we had an effect at the time that those rows were forming. That's what happened. Did it again the next year and didn't get the same results. Okay? But when we started doing this study, we weren't looking at all the growing degree days. Now we start counting growing degree units. And as long as you're underneath that V7 stage in that growing degree unit, we have some confidence that the herbicide programs that we're working with are pretty good. But we can still have a negative effect. It's us learning how to be able to utilize our herbicides without stressing that crop. Now, why am I telling you this? Guys, I'm telling you this, that don't think that you can go out and use these herbicides and not have some type of effect. When you get a chance, and some of you don't like hearing what I've got to say, but quite honestly, I believe we need to go in with a direct spray rig. Stay off the canopy. Don't get in on the burl, because why? The plant doesn't ignore what you put on it. The plant's not going to ignore it. It's going to absorb it, and in that year it may or may not have a positive or a negative effect. What you're trying to do is kill a weed. Every herbicide drop that hits that plant is not hitting the weed. So we got to look at how we can effectively get the herbicide to a weed. And if you've got a plant that's this big, guys, spraying over the top is not that effective. So we want to direct it down towards the bottom. We want to direct it off the plant so that we don't have a negative effect. We can show negative effects as the plant gets taller. Hey, you may not be able to get out into your fields until later on because it gets so blasted wet here. I understand that. Think about it though. Think how you can work your equipment so that you can direct the herbicide to be 95 to 100% effective and yet stay off of the top of this plant. Why, dude? Why? Because that's what it takes to go from 250 bushels to 350 bushels. That's the kind of effort that it takes. Reject status quo. Okay? Now, a lot of this I'm just it's not doing me much good to show you because I was going to talk specifically behind you. I do want to go through this. I do want to talk to you about this. I said, how do we approach 500 bushels? Ron, you talked a lot about 500 bushels. I'm excited about it. I wish I could get there. I know he does too. I'll read it to you, all right? Know your hybrids well. Why? If a hybrid's going to lodge, a lot of hybrids won't lodge 200 bushel corn. But you start pushing population, pushing nitrogen, and they're going to lodge. So you need to know the lodging capability of that plant. Mr. Randy Dowdy this year planted 40,000 plants, and he planted a lot of different hybrids. He had a lot of them in the fall this year. Okay, it was the kind of year that, a lot of wind would come through, a lot of it hits the ground. So know your hybrids well, okay? So you want to make sure that it has great scores on ear rots because you're going to water a lot. You want to know it's going to have great scores on lodging because you're going to push it. You're going to push it with populations. You're going to push it with nitrogen. You want to know it has good disease resistance because it gives you the genetic advantage that when you finally find that disease that's out there, you're ahead of it. You're helping it with those fungicides. And on and on and on. We resist pests. Okay. My next statement was what? Even emergence. Equal interception. He and I, man, we got this mind thing going on, okay? Well, now we got this mind melt over here. We understand. He understands me. I understand him. And you guys, you just don't understand how important this is to get an even emergence. If you do the same thing that he's done on your field, it'll open your eyes. You'll begin to see with these different hybrids how that first 12 to 24 hours will affect this. And it's all about how that little plant gathers energy, stores that energy, and then transfers that energy. That's what it's about, okay? And we want them all to do that. Second thing, plan to reduce stress. How do we do that? Is knowing what's going on at the time that hybrid's growing. Listen, guys, it doesn't take a break. You have to be there out there day and night. If you have to go out there and turn the pivot on at nighttime, go out there and turn the pivot on. All right? Make sure it gets wet. Make sure that you have plenty of moisture. It requires maintaining a balanced and high tissue level. In other words, Carl, you're probably going to flesh that in a little bit here. But I find that once we get into this 350, that 400 bushel level, we have to have leaf tissue that's 4.5, 5% nitrogen. We have to have about the same level in potash, okay? 0.3, 0.4 P. We have to really be pushing phosphorus, magnesium, sulfur. It's a balanced approach. Now the thing is, and here's what I want you to learn right here. In fact, I was talking to a gentleman a little bit earlier. Ammonia, potash, magnesium, and calcium. These are cations. They love to compete with each other. You get potash too high, you get calcium too high, magnesium is going to drop. Or vice versa. You put a lot of ammonia out at one time, if you're injecting nitrogen through your system, you've got it flushed with ammonia, okay? It's going to probably negatively affect the uptake of magnesium. It's a cation. See, these are having competitive effects. You have to know those. These are the things that you want to stay up with and understand that when you do something, you're going to have a reaction. You just want to make sure, as you take tissue analysis, that's why we do tissue analysis, is to make sure that we're staying up with a balanced approach. And if you see it becoming unbalanced, change it, react to it. Don't scratch your head and say, why? Call somebody up and do it. Reject the status quo. This is how we make these things happen for yourself. That's how you do it. And then being willing to experiment on your own farm. Okay, those are the things. Ron, you were talking about on one study we did this year at Ron's. First 12 hours of emergence, 31 plants in the little spot that we had right there, okay? The next 12 hours, 6 plants did. When we looked and calculated the number of kernels there was a 28% reduction. That equals 12 bushels. 12 bushel yield. You take 12 bushels and multiply it out. Just on that's $60, guys. For $5, that's $60. Just because they didn't emerge at the same time. You can do a lot. We can do it. We can pay for that treatment easily. Okay? We can do these kinds of things if you understand what's going on. It doesn't matter to me, really, twin rows, now rows. If you're on 30-inch rows, learn. Work it on 30-inch rows and then experiment with twins or 15s. It doesn't matter to me. Okay? But first, we want to make a few steps. So we can do it on 30-inch rows. If you got a hybrid that can stand and you want to push 40,000 plants, then good, let's do that. Let's push 40,000. Let's try it. Let's work it. If you got a field that's sandy and you got irrigation and you want to pump a little bit of water to it and you don't mind experimenting with it and you got twin rows, great. Let's do 50,000 plants. If you do a little bit. Okay? It's called experimenting and learning. Let's do the kinds of things that it takes, because Ronnie's right. It takes grains on a per unit area to get you these higher yields, and that's what it's going to take. So when I look at it, and I'll make the statements here, we have to increase the leaf area index. When we increase leaf area index, okay, we increase photosynthesis. Now, when we increase photosynthesis, okay, what we're going to do then is increase biomass and yield. It all goes hand in hand. When we measure photosynthesis, light interception, what we're measuring then is the response. As we'll see an increase in biomass. As we increase that biomass, then we give that plant a chance to increase grain yield. Now, here's the thing. Common harvest indexes run about 50, 52, somewhere around in there. Randy was doing higher than that, 58, 60. What does that mean? What he was doing was he was taking photosynthase. He had a good start. When you get a really good start, good root system, good plant development, guess what? It doesn't require as much root. You already got a good root profile. So all those carbohydrates, all that energy that's being formed in that plant now is doing what? It's focusing its attention on the greatest sink, which is that big old ear. Now it can fill it out. And if you keep water going into that plant all the way through the season, all the way to black layer, guess what? It is going to have good test weight. So now you got plenty of rows, plenty of kernels, plenty of ears, and test weight's the last one, and you're pumping test weight into that ear, and now you've just broken 300 bushels. Or three and a quarter. That's what it takes, is putting all these things together. And I wish I had, clarity and I could get up and run around and show you all these kinds of things. That was an ear back here, guys, a tassel and an ear that I was going to show you. And this is a map that you can create on your own. You can take your soil test recommendations. I was going to give you a base of what it's going to take to get 300 bushel corn. Here's our tissue analysis. NC State has that as well. You can take this, take NC State, look at the tissue analysis and map your own tissue. That's important. That's what this tissue tests are all about, is mapping the amount of nutrition that's in that plant. If you do that, guys, you'll begin to see how hard it is. To me, it's extremely difficult if you can't inject into your system. If you've got an irrigation system, get an injector pump. If you've got an irrigation system, get an injector pump. Because now you can inject nitrogen, you can inject potash and magnesium, and you can inject fungicides. And you can do it much more efficiently and effectively and reduce the amount of losses that take place when you have a real wet year. So I'll say it again. If you've got an irrigation system, get an injector pump. You'll be glad you did. When you start spreading out nitrogen over the season in 4 or 5 or 6 applications, you'll begin to understand, my, why didn't I do this a long time ago? Because now, what you're doing is, think about this. If you got a root profile that's 24 inches deep or 18 inches deep, when rain comes along, it moves nitrogen down. Well, you're going to add something 10 days later. Now, that top 4 inches is flushed with nitrogen. A little bit more rain comes along. Plant's taking it up. Nitrogen's down a little bit deeper. Get a little rain, it's 16 inches down. Now it's down there in that, 20 inches. Now it's down there in that base where those roots are going to pick it up a little bit later on. But you just flushed it with another set of nitrogen. Now, you've got nitrogen up in that top profile. So what you're doing is by injecting, you're adding nitrogen to that profile the whole season long. When you look at, this is data, this is corn yields relative to ear leaf sufficiency later. This data came from Tony Vines, Carl. This is Tony Vines' work in Purdue. Sharp scientist, good guy. I like what he's doing. And don't be afraid to ask these guys, you know, and if you call me, like I said, or write me, I'll give you this information. You'll look at this. By the time we reach silking stage, Ron and I realize it's probably 65 to 70% of the nitrogen that's taken up in the plant, that plant's going to use. About 70%. There's still 30% of the nitrogen is left to be taken up. It comes during the reproductive phase, 30%. Potash, man, if you're seeing potash deficiency at that time, wow. I won't say you're screwed, but it really does hurt. And the reason is because literally 90 to 100% of all the potash that crop's going to take up has been taken up. But what scares me more than anything is the fact that phosphorus, because we only have about 50% of our phosphorus. And that's why, to me, it's very, very important that early on we establish a really good root system so that every time we water, we get a little bit of phosphate in solution. It's taking it up, and it's taking it up early, and sustained. That's why I love chicken liver. Y'all use chicken liver? Yeah. Oh. Carl? I love chicken liver. Why do I love chicken liver? It's because it partitions over time, that phosphate. That's why I see a lot of times in Georgia where we use chicken litter, we're using that litter later in the season. It's not the early part. Chicken litter is awful early on, but later on it's in great shape. Help you along. Well, I'm not going to belabor the point because my time is up, but I wanted to tell you a couple of things here. This is a curve of kernel numbers, all right, and growth rate. Now, why am I throwing something that you can't read? Okay, well, it's simple. I want you to know that the number of kernels that develop on a plant is determined by light, okay, received in that 2 to 3 week period of time around that silking phase. In other words, if it's cloudy and it's raining, it can hammer us. Why? Because light and water are equal in its effect during that flowering stage. In other words, we can lose 40 or 50% of our yield. Yeah, and I've seen us lose 20 or 30% and even 40% of our yield when it's raining during that flowering time. You think, oh man, this is great. That's why dry land does good, because the yield potential is so small. But under an irrigated environment, I've seen us easily lose 40 bushels, 50 bushels, simply because of the timing of that rain and the effect that it's having on the number of kernels that are going to develop. This is the curve right here, and you can't see it. This is the same curve of water and drought and its effect on that growth rate, on kernel numbers. So getting that, and let me wind it up. I'm going to get through this. Here's some slides. that I'm showing of the effectiveness of irrigation and fungicides. Like I said, I can send you a PDF of that so you can take a good sharp look at it. And this was something I really wanted to spend some time on, but you will not be able to see it. So that's why I'm spending more time just talking about the philosophy of producing 300, 400, 500 bushels. This is the amount of water on a daily basis that a crop uses. That's why if you're irrigating, that's why I want you to send me an email, and I'll be happy to send you the PDF of the slides. You can see it, and you can get this. When you look at how much water is being used, you must supply that amount of water. Y'all can have all the rain you need out here. You can get 30 inches of rain during crop season, but if it comes at the wrong time, you're only going to make 100 bushels. Okay? That's why irrigation is a way to supplement that, is to effectively change that particular environment. The common mistakes, and I'm going to leave you with this, is not irrigating early enough. Ronnie said something to you about one of my secrets. If you're not planting 2.5 inches deep, 2.5 inches deep in him, if you plant 1.5 inches and you got irrigation, water it. As soon as you get out of the field, turn the system off. That makes sense. You say, well, I got moisture. You don't have enough. Water it. You'll water it up at that point in time. That's what you want to do. You want to make sure you get that stand emerged. And you want to think about how that crop's using in relation to what? The root system, not the depth of that soil. Because the depth of that soil is going to hold that water for a long time until the root takes it out. So you want to water it according to that root system. And you want to maintain a level, and that's what these graphs will show you, is how much water is being used. But you water that crop up. That's the common mistake, okay? Secure and even stand. Underestimating demand, that's what I find is typically the next mistake. If you don't know where the crop stage is, typically you will underestimate the demand. Second of all, the way you're going to change this is knowing the plant, but second of all, how many of you that have irrigation systems have gone out and set cups? If you're 3 years old, how many have you rechecked it? Recheck that and make sure that you're getting an even distribution of water. If you haven't, that may be why you have a problem. Okay? I speak from experience in this area. You really need to make sure that you check those systems, that you're getting the amount of water that you think you are. Because it can be minor, but that minor difference is that every day that crop's losing yield. You just don't see it because you're not getting out enough water. So check that pivot. Next thing is depleting subsoil moisture. I already talked about that. You deplete subsoil moisture, guys, you will never catch it up. I have a graph, several graphs in here that show that, but you won't be able to see it. And I use soil moisture sensors to check my math. And if y'all are not using soil moisture systems in just a couple of areas of your field, let me encourage you to do that. Rod, let me ask you a question. Rod. Do y'all have anybody using soil moisture sensors here yet? And a few of them? Good. You want to set those depths 6, 12, 18, and 24 if your soils go that deep. Why? Because what you want to, if you keep up with that 6 and that, or that 8 inches and that 12 inches, that 12, that 18, and 24 you will never lose it. But once you get to that silting phase, about 50%, 55% of that moisture is going to be extracted from that deep. And now you're going to really see how effective you have been in your earlier watering. Because you're going to have a good root system in that top profile. And if you keep it wet, you're going to keep that bottom wet, but that bottom's going to lose moisture fast. And it's hard to keep up with it. It's just, if it's a dry year, it's very hard to keep up with it. That's why every day you have to be out there. If you see that crop stress, you've lost yield. That's the way it is. If you see one day, just one day of stress, you've lost yield. That's why it's so important every day to be out in that field. All right. Soil types, you have to account for heat and evaporation. Okay? I can tell you right now, this summer and even last summer, I was putting out a half an inch a day. Yeah, to keep up, because at peak demand, your hybrid is pulling out anywhere from a third, say 0.33 to 0.43 inches of water on a per daily basis. And where my nozzles are set, they're set up a little high. I'm losing a good tenth before it hits the ground, before it gets in. So what? I'm putting out a half an inch of water per day. Have to. So that's how you water this crop sometimes. You got to understand your pivot. You got to understand how much water is hitting the ground. You got to understand how much water is in that ground and how fast that plant's using. That's the plant efficiency and your efficiency. Well, I could go through this. Here's some slides, and let me just finish up because I'm out of time. Ron, why don't you come up here? All right, guys. Ron knows this. He sat through one of my talks. I could go all day and specifically go through this, and I apologize I wasn't able to do that. But I think it's important that this is not mission impossible. What this is a pathway. It's a journey. And because you've been farming 30 years doesn't mean you shouldn't embark on this journey. We have great hybrids. I would never go back to yesterday. We have incredibly good hybrids today that can give us this kind of yield. We have new formulations of new products. We have stuff that we don't even know how well it works because we're not challenging it enough. But I can promise you that when you put them all together and you keep them all together, they do have a synergistic effect. And they will give us yield. And, you know, people like Ron and Carl and Jim here, and I don't know, I'm sure there's some others here that I haven't called your name, and I apologize because I don't know you. But I can tell you, they're working on your behalf. And I love it because I can use their data. I use y'all's experience here to help our growers as well. And I hope that you'll use, this kind of information today that will pique an interest. That's all. Think about if you haven't ever staged a crop, that's the first thing you want to do. Learn how to use the growing degree units. That's something. If you've got an irrigation system you haven't injected, that's the next thing you need to do. Okay? All right. Every day, just find one little thing that you can change, and then change it. And when you do, and you see that result, now pick 2 more and add to it the next year. And then if you see a product, they want you to test the product. Put it all together and test the product. Make sure you replicate it. Why? Because that's real confidence. I'll tell you the experience, Ron, and you've had this experience. I'll put a product out, it looks good. I'll get all excited about it. I might call somebody up and they say, they'll call me. I say, yeah, it looks good, man. I can see an effect. Man, I'm really happy for it. And I go out there and harvest it. Nothing. No effect. Dang it. Well, you know what it was? It's my own bias. It's my own visual bias sometimes. I think I'll see it out there and I'm looking out, stuck back in here. Yeah, this looks really good. And then it's not that. That's why when we replicate things, it gives you confidence. It's confidence because when we do this, when we use that math, we use that statistics, it helps us take out our own bias. And when you remove that, we really learn. We really learn. So guys, thank you very much. I know maybe a few of you got some questions for Ron. I wanted to bring him up here so that maybe he could answer some of those questions. Any questions out here?
Let me do a timeout.
Timeout. Never mind.
We're going to do that. One little bit of housekeeping while you're thinking about some questions. If you do have a question, raise your hand, and we're going to have somebody come around so we're recording, so we want to be able to hear your question. So think about that for a second. Evaluations, everybody get one. Anybody not have one? All right. When you finish with those, pass them to the far end of the row you're on, and we're going to collect those across the end, and we'll draw for the door prizes in a few seconds, but we want to get some questions in. So now we're going back to questions. If you have a question, raise your hand. We want to get you on the microphone.
I tell you, Ron's was exciting. I don't know about y'all. I learned some stuff. I'm sure you got a question for him. All right. Who's the shy one in the bunch? I don't know you. I'm going to pick you out. I'm going to call him on you. No question? You got a question about Randy Dowdy's stuff? I'll answer that, maybe that'll get something. Yeah, fungicide, he uses a lot of fungicide. I think when he made that 500 bushels, he applied it 4 times. 5 times in one field. That's why they added it to $1,300. Yes, sir.
So what we've heard, Michael. Doesn't matter. Dr. Henniger, Dr. Lee, I know we hadn't really, I didn't hear you guys mention much about tillage or, especially we get some compacting rainfall during the season. What can we do to alleviate that effect?
You know your soil,
Well, yeah, first of all, before I answer, tell them what Randy does on his soil for tillage, just to be clear about what a 500 bushel tillage looks like.
Okay, sure. To answer that question specifically, Randy used trend rows, and he used them 12 inches apart. He had an effective 12 by 24, okay? And he put together a in-row subsoiler, a KNC subsoiler unit that had those units 12 inches apart, 12 and 24. Why? We have a very sandy soil, right, that compacts easily, and during the winter time, we'll actually get soil movement into those old roots that have decayed, and that's why even he is doing fall tillage, but he's following it up. Now, in some of his stuff, in 15, he's done it with a V-ripper, like a bottom plow, but it's a V-ripper. Compaction is bad, absolutely. It's bad on the roots, it's hard on the roots. One of the things, a great instrument for all of you to get, it's really inexpensive, is a soil penetrometer. I would use it. If during the year you see a problem, I take that soil penetrometer and I'd find out where my row is, and then I'd find out where that compaction layer is. You have to disrupt it. Now, I would rather run it, talk about the kinds of soils that you got, and maybe methods of which y'all can do that.
Yeah, I was smart, wasn't I? I got the expert to answer before I had the answer. You learn over time. Yes, Dewey's exactly right. You need to, tillage is a site-specific activity. And even within a field, to be frank about it, you know, look at the old work that has been done on tillage here at NC State, and it will tell you that compaction layer can vary depending on what your soil type is, what your tillage practices in the past have. Dewey's right, compaction bad. We got to deal with that. On many soils, and sandy soils, and even on some of these black soils, tillage is about whether it's in-row subsoiling, which I don't want to disturb any more soil and reducing compaction than possible. So in-row subsoiling to me makes a lot of sense in most of our environments. There are some situations where we can't use subsoiling, where we got dark soils with a lot of wood in them. We got to do something else. We got to reduce compaction through whether a cover crop or some other ways of doing compaction reducing activities. It is very site specific, so I'd encourage you, first of all, to do what Dewey says. Find out where you have compaction. Get that rod out there. Most of you on these dark soils will probably find it's mostly on the headlands. Not much compaction in some of these fields out here where we've done a good job. Do something on your headlands to improve that soil, reduce that soil compaction. For you guys with the little sandier, lighter textured soils, you may find that your compaction is fairly good. It's severe in some places, not so bad. Focus on those areas. And again, whatever method you choose to reduce compaction, try to use as much as something that it disturbs the soil as little as possible, whether it's in-row subsoiling, whether it's going to some practices like deep-rooted cover crops, whatever it is that you need to do. So it is, I don't have a recommendation specifically for one practice that makes sense, but I think what I was asking for Dewey, and he gave it very nicely, what does it take to make 500 bushel in Georgia? They make sure they don't have compaction. What's it going to take to make 500 bushels here? Make sure you don't have compaction, whatever method that is.
One of the things that you need to add to that is is we ought to think about planting time. You know, it's one thing to subsoil, right? It's one thing to break that ground up, but if it's wet, if you go out there too fast, you'll get sidewall compaction. So if you don't understand your planter and how to reduce pressure, that's one thing. So you got to think about the down pressure of your planter and make sure, one, you're not causing the problem. Two, you want to plant too wet. Because if you plant too wet, you'll get sidewall compaction where that seed is sitting. And if it does happen to dry on you, and you, particularly if you're at 1.5 inches or 1.5 inches, you won't get a root system. It won't form. It'll just be a ball. And by the time you get up to a V9 or V10 stage and you get a hard wind and something, all of a sudden you start seeing plants lean. Well, why in the world does that happen? Why? You have a limited root system. So, you know, you'll say, well, dear, all I've heard y'all talk about is early planting. Well, that's kind of important, but let's don't make one mistake to try to avoid another one, all right? So, avoid the sidewall compaction by just delaying yourself a little bit. Now, you know, understand if it's raining for a week, 2 weeks, don't sweat. I'm serious, don't sweat it, okay? Because usually if that's happening, you'll still be fine. Just wait till the weather gives you a chance that you don't have to put it in mud. All right, just don't do that. Because that's just as bad as not being able to till it and have, you know, a shallow root system, because that's going to create a shallow root system. All right, so don't plant when it's wet like that. Another question. Great question. I like it. I think you're getting hot and tired and ready to go home. Any other questions?
If we could give Dewey a hand.
No, thank you.